Heyo, I'm Christy Rocha, podcast host and content creator, and I am thrilled to welcome you to The Inner Edit. This podcast is all about us, the creators, the storytellers, visionaries, navigating the ever-changing online world. We are in this together, facing challenges unique to our craft, like burnout, setting boundaries, dealing with negativity, and that oh-so-familiar imposter syndrome. Join me as I chat with fellow creators, therapists, and coaches to explore collaborations, making connections, diving into creating conscious content, figuring out how to maximize our content output, and discovering that mindset magic that keeps us going. Whether you're a content creator seeking resources or just curious about the behind-the-scenes world of digital creators, The Inner Edit is your resource for personal and professional growth in the digital world. We're all going through the same things, so let's talk about it. Hit that subscribe button and welcome to The Inner Edit. Hello. Welcome back to the show. Today I'm joined by Amy Morin, psychotherapist, international best-selling author, and host of the Mentally Stronger podcast. Her books on mental strength have sold more than 1 million copies. Woo! All right, Amy started her career as a therapist and began freelance writing on the side for extra money after facing tragedy and struggles in her life. She's going to tell us that story in just a little bit. When her article, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, went viral, it changed her entire life. The article appeared nationally, including in Forbes, and Amy began speaking publicly about this article and her story. Eventually, she landed a book deal, and later 5 more book deals, and became a best-selling author. Now she continues to create content around mental strength, and her books, podcasts, and article have served as inspiration to me and so many others. I'm so excited to welcome Amy to the show. This is very cool. And discuss all things content creation, mental strength, therapy, and what it's like to become essentially an unintentional overnight success. Here's Amy. Hey, Amy. So nice to meet you. Thanks for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I am too. I first heard you on Dr. Caroline Leaf's podcast in 2020. You were being interviewed about your viral article, and I very specifically remember I was in the backyard with my newborn attached to me, my toddler running around. I'm on month 9 of quarantine with these kids and all the stress and all the things everybody went through. And here's this interview, and I was just like, okay, like I need a list. I need to read her list. It just came at such a time, I would say. So I don't know, I feel like I've been following you for some time now, and it's just cool to see you here. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad that you found that interview and the list helpful.
Yeah. And so your story with that, as you say, was a bit accidental. Would you share a little bit about what led to that article and then, of course, which has transpired into the career you have today?
Yeah, so it's been almost 10 years.
That's
Actually,
nuts, isn't
this
it?
month is 10 years since I wrote the article. So I was a therapist living in rural Maine and was had a great job as a therapist in an office, and I thought this is what I was meant to do. Loved it. But early on in my career, my mom passed away. I was 23 when she passed away suddenly and unexpectedly. And then 3 years to the day that my mom died, I
The
lost my
day?
to the day to the day
Whoa.
I lost my 26-year-old husband.
Oh my gosh.
And it felt, of course, since it's the 3rd year anniversary of when we lost my mom, it felt like this cruel joke. I was waiting to wake up. At what
Yeah.
point, will I find out this isn't real? But it was. And so I don't have my mom. I don't have my husband. I'm supposed to be a therapist who helps other people with their problems. And then on top of everything, then one of my biggest issues right in front of me was I didn't have enough money to keep my house. We had bought a
Mm.
house when we were pretty young, but my husband was a breadwinner. And the last thing I wanted to do was move because I thought, I feel like I've lost so much in my life. The last thing I want to do is now pack up and have to move. At least let me stay here for a little while. But I couldn't do it on my therapist salary. So I started writing as a side hustle.
Mm.
because you can really only be a therapist so many hours a week. It wasn't like I could be a therapist after hours and on the weekends and still be effective at my job. So started writing, because the cool thing about being a freelance writer was I could write an article on a Tuesday night if I wanted, but I didn't have to. I could write 4 articles on the weekend if I wanted, but I didn't have to. So it gave me that freedom and flexibility. So I started writing articles, and they were mostly really sterile things like 10 things to do in New York City. And I wrote for the content mills that paid me between $15 and $25 per article, but I could churn them out really fast. And they weren't really about mental health or therapy or anything else, which at that moment in my life was fine. But um, a few years down the road, I was able to earn enough money. I earned about 600 extra a month just from churning out these articles,
Wow.
which let me stay in my house. That was all I
That's a
needed.
lot. Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
And so I was so grateful for it. It kept me busy, gave me a lot to do, but I didn't have to move. And then spent years trying to figure out what's next for me and how do I pick up the broken pieces of my life. And several years later, found love again, got remarried, moved out of that house voluntarily and got a different place. Like life was good. And then my father-in-law got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I
Mm.
was just like, life's finally like looking good. Why do I have to lose somebody else? And my father-in-law and I had become super close. So the thought of losing one more person just seemed unfathomable, but it wasn't like I had a choice. So I wrote myself a letter, and it was called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And I thought, if I have this list of just what not to do, I'll get through the day. So I would take it out of my pocket and just be like, okay, Amy, don't do these things today, and somehow you'll get through it. And I thought, if I find this list helpful, maybe somebody else will. So I published it online, and I got paid $15. And I stepped away from my
Insane.
computer thinking that that was the end of it. And
Yeah.
that website broke that same day. And I thought, well, that's weird. I didn't know it was because of the traffic from my article. And about 3 days after I published it, it got picked up by Forbes. And it became one of Forbes' most read articles of all time with over 10 million views really, really
Wow.
quickly. And then it got picked up by Business Insider, where it got 50 million views. And before I know it, like radio stations are calling me, and TV shows, and like MTV in Finland and CNN in Mexico. And
Wow.
all of these phone calls where people are like, wanted to talk about my article, but they all thought like, oh, it's a therapist who mastered this list, because there was no context of why I wrote it.
Wow.
So now I'm stuck, because I'm like, actually, I struggle with these things. And now do I want to make my story public? And the answer was no.
Right.
And then a literary agent emailed me and said, you should write a book. And I actually ignored her email at first, because I didn't even know what a literary agent was. Luckily,
Right.
she followed up with me. And
Right.
within a month, we had a book deal. And now, 10 years later, I have my 6th book is about to come out. And I've been writing and speaking and podcasting about mental strength ever since.
That is wild.
It's
That
a
is wild.
strange, and now I get to live on a sailboat in the Florida Keys and do all this really cool stuff. And
Yeah.
but 600-word article absolutely changed the course of my life.
That is incredible. Like, and I knew the story. I didn't recall that it was 3 years to the day between your mom and your first husband. And there were certain details I didn't recall, but I knew the story, but hearing it like that is wild and just puts so much. Oh, like, it's so validating to hear and encouraging, because I think, something that so many creators struggle with is constantly churning out content that, like, no one sees, and
Right.
it's like it just takes one, though. Like, it just takes one for people to see to, like, completely change the whole trajectory of your life. Like, that's awesome.
Right? And it was,
Yeah.
I had like $120 netbook, one of those little computers. I had really slow internet, because in rural Maine, they still don't have fast internet. And so it wasn't about all these like bells and whistles and tools.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to do it, never imagined that this would be the article that went viral
Yeah.
ever. And so no matter what, yeah, it just takes one piece of content, I think, to change the trajectory of everything.
Yeah. And so I'm curious, here I am asking you about it. You've spoken about this story, I'm sure hundreds of, if not thousands of times now. Let's go back to the first couple of times you had to start talking about it. Like, what was that decision like when your initial gut reaction is no, and then you've started to do it? Like, how did you get from A to B?
So at first, when I didn't tell the story. There's interviews with me. Forbes interviewed me. I was on Fox News, and lots of people asked me, like, how'd you come up with this list? And I just said, I'm a therapist and I know these things
Oh,
because I'm not going to
interesting.
tell anybody. And so what nobody knew. So as I was on TV doing all of this, my father-in-law passed away in the midst of all of that.
Oh,
And I didn't say a word.
wow.
And partly because I was a therapist in a small town. And I thought,
Mhm.
as a therapist, usually you don't want your clients to know what you're going through because they'll feel bad coming to talk to me if they know I'm doing all of this stuff or I'm struggling with so many things. So that was one of the big reasons why I wanted to keep it private. I'm also a private person. My husband's family was in the CIA as well. So like the idea that you would post anything public to them is just like completely foreign. Like you
Yeah.
do not post what you're eating for dinner and where you're eating it on
Right.
the internet. So
Right.
so I had always just not really posted a lot of personal things on the internet for those reasons. And so at first I didn't tell the story at all. And I was at dinner one night with my friends and I said, "Hey, I have an opportunity to write a book, but they want me to tell my story, the backstory of why I wrote that article." And they were like, yeah, you should really do that." And I'm like, but I'm a therapist. Again, like it might ruin my career as a therapist to put my personal life out there. And they really were like, "Yeah, but it will give you more credence. Like people will understand. You didn't write these things just because you went to college and learned about mental health and mental strength, but you wrote it from a place of pain and
Right.
that might resonate more with people." And so I remember I then outed myself to my literary agent and said, "Well, there's a backstory." And she said, "Well, you don't have to tell it." But again, she was like, "You might want to." And
Right.
then we had an appointment with HarperCollins, like one of the biggest publishers in the world. And
Mhm.
I shared the backstory and they were like, "Yeah, again, no
You're gonna
pressure,
wanna
but it
tell the
might work."
story. Yeah.
And so I just remember thinking, because I just thought at the time I was going to be a therapist who got to write a book, and that was
Mhm.
amazing. And I thought that then after that it would go away and I would still be a therapist, and never imagined it would turn into a series or that it would evolve into all of this. So early on, it was a difficult decision just because I thought once you put it out there, you can't take it back.
Mhm.
And and then once I guess it was probably my TEDx talk was the first time I really publicly like said the story out loud. It was in my book and I had a TED talk that came out the next year, but and then my TED talk's been viewed 23 million times. And you
I
think,
read
well,
that. It's insane.
so
Yes.
I've never regretted sharing my story. I think one of my problems now when I repeat it, like I just did to you, I think sometimes it sounds like scripted or rehearsed because I've said it
Yeah.
so many times, or like I don't feel bad that these things happened, but
Yeah.
it's just because I've said this story so many times.
Mhm.
But I remember when I went to narrate the audiobook, and I think one of the best advice I got was from I had hired somebody to help me figure out how do you narrate an audiobook because I was definitely not an audiobook narrator and knew nothing. I had listened to my first audiobook as I was driving down to narrate my own book. But I hired a coach and I said, "I don't know how to do this." And she said, "My best advice to you is you want to read those first few pages of your book out loud to yourself." She said, "I know you've told the story and you wrote about the story, but there's something
Mhm.
about hearing yourself reading that out loud that you're going to cry." And I was like, "No, I've told this story enough by now." She was absolutely right. Something about
Yeah.
narrating it. I'm glad I practiced it ahead of time because it hits a little bit differently. And so, again, I guess to answer your question in a long way is I've never really regretted sharing it now, but I'm glad that I took my time in being mindful about what to share, when to share it, who to share it with, and how to make my story come out.
Yeah. So are you still practicing?
A little bit. I mostly write and I have a podcast as well, and I do lots of other things. So I
Yes.
practice a little bit, but on a different scale than I did before, for sure.
Okay. Because this is something, I shared with you off air that my podcast like started as basically my advocacy for therapy. And so it really was interviewing therapists mostly. And I would find them from social media. And there is this incredibly challenging layer added to being a public figure and a therapist at the same time. Advice for navigating that fine line.
Yeah, because again, my fear was
Yeah,
don't tell your story because it will ruin your therapy career. Well,
exactly.
now people find me because they read my book. So
Okay.
people will seek me out purposely because they know my story. So it's a really different dynamic now because they already know the backstory and they know a little bit about my life. So that's, I guess it
Yeah.
feels a little different, but yet at the same time, people come in saying, "I knew you were the right therapist for me because I read your book or because I read your articles or I follow you on social media, or I listen to your podcast." So I already know like what sort of framework you use, or that you use certain skills, cognitive behavioral therapy. So they feel like they understand it better coming into it. And a lot of
Mhm.
them, then I think it does a lot of the groundwork for us. Whereas I'm not a match for everybody. And somebody else might come into my therapy office being like, oh, I assumed we were going to do things like this, but then they don't know my style or anything like that. But when people seek me out because they've already heard some of my stuff, they're
Yeah.
often really good then at pinpointing this is somebody I could relate to or somebody I can work with.
Yeah. It's like, in business when they talk about, finding your ideal client.
Right.
It's like you're putting out there essentially a way for someone to define for themselves if they're your ideal client. Yeah.
Right. And because
Yeah.
otherwise, like on Psychology Today, like people who are in the director, you give a little description of yourself and
Right.
people will kind of be like, I don't know if this is the right person for me or not. But I find that people who end up reaching out to me and asking if I can be their therapist, a lot of them have done extensive homework by listening to several of my podcast episodes, reading my books, and then they're like, yeah, I won't just want to learn more about this.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, a, a sidebar question. Any significance with 13?
No. So because again, I didn't mean to make this public, and it was just that was just the number I had when I was
Okay.
done. And I
Okay.
think it helped it go viral because people are intrigued by the number 13, and
Yeah.
odd numbered lists do better, and but it wasn't in the plan at all.
Yeah. I'm just curious because I 13 is like a lucky number for me. And so yeah, it does. It's one of the things that when I'm scrolling, like I said, found you on Dr. Leaf's podcast. I'm scrolling and she was just like 13. I was like 13 done. I'm listening to it.
It's not funny,
It
right?
is funny, like the things that grab you, right?
Mhm.
All right. So you mentioned now, like you've had the books, you've got the podcast, you're doing major speaking events. Has there anything that come from these experiences that you wouldn't have expected? Anything now from being this, like, kind of personal brand and this career that's so different from, sitting in a room one-on-one with someone, like, anything that's come from it that you didn't expect that's positively, like, impacted your life or n perhaps negatively?
I guess a couple things. One is like people are so kind. Like I'd always
Mhm.
heard about like, oh, people on the internet are mean and there's so many trolls. I have so many people now that send me like really uplifting and kind messages. And I think that
That's
is
nice.
fascinating. I'm out here trying to teach people about mental strength. And I'll have readers that are like, Amy, I think that it must be such a difficult time sometimes to have to speak about mental strength during this crisis. And they send me uplifting messages. And I think they don't know me. And yet,
Yeah,
and they could easily be like, oh, she's a therapist. She's got the tools she needs, but they send me really nice messages. And that just
that's awesome.
uh,
Yeah.
that is amazing. So I love that. And then like spin-off things, I guess. Again, I thought I'll just talk about mental strength, but a few years ago, I decided just for fun, I was like, I had met this person who got six-pack abs in a month, and I'm like, I wonder if I could do that. So I'm like, put me in touch with their trainer. And I didn't mean to make that public either. I was like, I wasn't going to tell anybody because I wasn't even sure it was going to work. But, he insisted, like, "Just take a before picture, and then we'll take a after picture as well." And then, we ended up on the news and all sorts of things about that. And now I make, like, courses with him on how to make six-pack abs and, like,
Cool.
like, completely. I mean, I was, like, a chubby kid growing up, and that was never really my thing, but I think, "Oh, that's interesting that." And then I could talk about the mental strength aspects of fitness, and that sort
Mhm.
of led to this other whole opportunity. And then sometimes people want to talk about my business of writing books, and so then I could
Mhm.
talk about the mental strength aspects of writing, or of having a podcast, or of having a being a solopreneur, all of those sorts of things too. And the cool thing about mental strength is it applies to so
Yeah,
many things, and
everything.
that yeah, it's led to lots of interesting opportunities like that.
Yeah, that's cool. Um, have there been opportunities that you've said no to? And if so, how did you know to say no versus the ones that you feel like, "Yes, I wanna say yes to this." Like, how do you make those decisions?
Oh, that's something I have wrestled with for years, like, over the past 10 years. Like, I didn't know certain things existed. Somebody would email me and be like, "Can you, participate in this new app that we have, or be on these we're making a course. Do you wanna take part in that? Can you be on my show? Do you wanna co-write something, or do you wanna co-create this content?"
Mhm.
And it's tough
Yeah.
sometimes because, there's the fear of missing out. If I say no to this opportunity and it turns out to be absolutely amazing, will I regret it? But on the other
Mm.
hand, I've said yes to things that were just a complete time suck. And in the end, I think, no, that wasn't a good use of my time.
Mm-hmm.
So I have gotten better, I think, over the years at realizing, yes, if I say no to a lot of things, there's a good chance I'm going to miss out on something amazing once in a while. But on the other hand, if I say yes to too many things, I won't get anything done. I won't
Yeah.
be able to focus on my job. So now I try to ask better questions at like, well, what's the time commitment involved in this? Because I might be thinking it's going to be 20 minutes and somebody else is like, no, it's 3 hours a week for 6 months. Well, no.
Right.
So to be more upfront with asking, like, what's the time commitment? What's the expectation? If you've done this with other people, like, what have the results been? I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to just hear the best case scenario, but tell me the worst case scenario as well. That somebody else
Interesting.
made a course and only sold 2 and somebody else sold 10 million. Well, of course, you're going to tell me about the person that sold 10 million.
Right.
So I think in asking those sorts of questions to get my expectations to a more reasonable level and to understand what it's really going to entail helps me
Yeah.
figure out when to say yes and when to say no.
Okay. Okay. And I want to go back to what you said about, the kindness of that you've encountered with people on the internet and people messaging you. Do you find that you have a recognizable community online? Like, are there people that are, in there from the beginning, messaging you, this and that? Do you feel like it's a cohesive community, or is it like these are just people that follow my work and I check in with them from time to time? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. So I have some people that like emailed me when they read the article 10 years ago, and they're still following me now. And they're like, my gosh, Amy, this is amazing that you turned that article into all of this other stuff. And they'll still email me regularly or they'll reply to my newsletter. But
Mm,
something I realized, and it's interesting you asked that question, I was like, people that are interested in building mental strength, I think they're all pretty cool people, right? That they seem
mm,
to be like, open to other people's mistakes, like they're non-judgmental and they're just like, again, cheering me on. So I was like, what if I could connect all of these amazing people? Because they all message me and email me and I can email them back occasionally, but
right.
like, what if they could meet each other? So my latest plan that's in the works is launching a subscription service it's
Mm,
connected to my podcast, but a big part of that will be, they get bonus content and bonus episodes, but they'll also get a community where they can connect with each other.
yeah.
Because I just kept thinking, like, what if everybody else had a cheerleader like I do? When people are like, oh, this is amazing, Amy, you have a new book, I'm going to buy it before you even tell me the name of it because I'm just, want to support your work.
Right.
What if we had people that like also got that? I wanted to share that. So for a long time, I've thought, how could I best do that or create a community so that people could interact and cheer each other on and talk about regular struggles. Like,
Yeah.
yes, this what we're doing in life is hard, and here are some of the obstacles that we face. So that's the next thing on my agenda is to make it so that people can connect with each other, so that we do have a community rather than just one-off emails from people that
Yeah.
only come to me.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I tend to agree with you. I think that when you're in a wellness space or mental health space, there is so much grace across the board and so much support. You do unfortunately see some of the opposite, but I've even found that in doing this work and communicating with guests online or over email, it's like if I don't respond that same day, there's no like, "Hey, where are you? What's going on?" It's like, "No problem. You needed to take care of you." Like it's
Right.
just such a nice space, especially like coming from corporate world, coming from and witnessing other family and friends in different industries where I hope that some of that's changing, but yeah, you're right. Like you have people that tend to be self-aware, interested in personal growth, and have some sensitivity to what people need and like what community is and how it thrives. So that's really cool. Is there anything going back to the earlier days that you feel like you did to foster and nurture that growing community?
I think early on, no, like I didn't, again, when this went viral, like
You're
I
just like,
had a
Hey, I'm here."
I didn't really even have I had a website because I wrote a couple parenting articles. So my website was just focused on, hey, my name's Amy and I write a couple parenting articles every now and then. And I didn't know what to do. And so I actually, and I, again, because I didn't expect this to take off. So I really didn't do anything to foster the mental strength community because it
Yeah.
never occurred to me. I didn't have an Instagram page. I was like really late to getting an Instagram page. All I had was Facebook, which 10 years ago was the most popular thing, but I had
Mhm.
like, 12 followers and 12 people following me on Twitter. So I didn't really know what to do with it. And I thought it would, again, I thought it was going to die down, or even I thought after I wrote a book, like, probably isn't gonna happen. In fact, when my book came out, my publisher had big hopes, like, "Hey, if 50 million people read your article, then if we just get a fraction of those people to buy the book came out and it actually did not sell that many copies, and so they were
Really?
like, "Yeah, it's probably your last book," and I was like, "Oh, not a problem," and it took a solid year and a half before we hit any bestsellers list, and then it ballooned from there, but,
Wow.
um and that's always been my thing is I'm like the slow burn, like, for the most part, other than the viral article, but other than
Right.
that, like, it's, the test of time and, which I think sometimes works out better anyway, so then I've been able to think, "Yeah, how do I attempt to foster this?" And so I guess I started a newsletter early on. That was
Okay.
the best I could come up with was I'll start a newsletter.
It's not nothing. I mean, it's a lot of time and work that goes into a newsletter. Um, Interesting about the slow burn. Even though now in hindsight you can see the benefits of it happening that way, in the moment, was there panic, imposter syndrome, like fear of just this book, all the when you said your publisher's like, "Whoa, 55 million read this article. Great, this book." Like, that's a lot of pressure.
Yep.
And then for it to take a year plus to really take off, like, what was going through your mind and how did you keep yourself kind of steadfast on the course?
Yeah, so when I wrote the book, by the time I got the contract, there was some like a question about the UK versus the US. So it took a couple months to like figure out some details. My agent and the publisher figured that out. It was
Okay.
March when I got the contract. My book was due in June. I had never written a book.
Oh my
I had
god.
I had a full-time job plus I was a part-time writer. And I
Oh
didn't
my
dare
god.
quit those things because I was like,
Yeah.
nobody makes a living as an author, so I'm just going to write a book. So I literally would write one chapter and then the next day I would, edit it, and then the 3rd day I would have to send it to my,
Wow.
editor, and it was done, and so it happened really quickly. When the book came out, I continued my day job. I was still working as a therapist and, was able to market the book, like, in the evenings or on the weekends, a little bit here and there, but I didn't understand, like, how much it takes to market a book,
Mhm.
and then it came out and it didn't do that well, and I was like, "Eh, whatever, I'm a therapist who got to write a book. That is pretty cool."
Okay.
And then about a year and a half later, we got unexpected press in some really weird and interesting places. Rush Limbaugh read it on the air, and, like, my book sold out everywhere in,
Well,
like, one day.
yeah.
And to the point that, like, I couldn't even make a bestsellers list because there weren't enough books in the store, because normally, like, Barnes& and Noble will only buy the amount of books they think they're gonna sell in a certain time period, so they usually
Mhm.
only have, like, 2 copies of every book. My book literally sold off the shelves, so we thought, I can't even hit a bestsellers list now." So luckily then the ebook, people bought enough copies of the ebook that we made Wall Street Journal and USA Today bestseller list. And then it's hit the bestseller list since then with other random spikes in media traffic here and there, but for that first year and a half, I was like, "It's cool, I got to be a therapist who wrote a book."
Okay.
Fully thinking I was gonna always be a full-time therapist who wrote a book, and then at some point I was like, maybe I could pitch them another book idea, or I could quit my job and see what happens." So it was July 4th that I quit my full-time job as a therapist.
Hmm.
Had a conversation with my boss, and I was like, "I'm not sure this is gonna work out." And he said, "I'll keep you on the per diem list. That way, if we ever if you need to come back, you don't have to, like, reapply for your job, the whole
That's
9
awesome.
yards." And he was
Yeah.
sorta like, "Go ahead, like, this only happens to people once in a lifetime. Go see if you can make this work." And
Right.
and that was huge to helping me have the courage to say, "I'm gonna quit my day job."
Okay. Okay. So that aspect of so cool. I'm a therapist that got to write a book, not getting overly sounds like in the weeds of, oh my gosh, that didn't go well or go as I expected, like this and that. Is that an innate part of your personality, or is that something that mindset shift learned? Like, I'm just trying to put myself in the shoes now of, well, myself. I can imagine writing a book. Like, it's no joke with what it takes to write a book. And then I I I would have a hard time with that mentality, and so I'm wondering if that's just, like, an innate part of who you are and how you are with most things, like, kind of shifting that perspective, or there was something learned in you that went, "No, this is just how I have to see things now." Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm could answer that now that I've said it out loud, but I
Well,
wanna hear you
I
say
think
it.
I had worked so hard to become a therapist, and I thought,
Okay.
like, nobody in my family had really been to college at that point. My sister is now a therapist too, but, like, nobody, so it was already beyond my wildest dreams that I got to go to college,
Okay.
I got a master's degree, I had to be a therapist, and I didn't think it was possible to, like, throw that away to become an author in the
Okay.
moment. And my concern was too, so as a therapist, I was told when people come into your office, build on their strengths. You tell them what they're doing well. Like, "Hey, Jimmy, that's great that you get up early every day and have time to yourself. Keep doing that."
Mhm.
But I was like, if I don't tell him what not to do, I feel like I'm doing him a disservice. Because again, if I went to a physical trainer and they said run on the treadmill, great, but I'd want them to say don't eat the jelly donut on the way here, and then you don't have to run so long.
Right.
And so, but that was really counterintuitive to what therapists are taught to do.
Okay.
So I was terrified I was going to ruin my therapy career early on. I was like, "Oh, I just told people don't feel sorry for yourself." And so I actually had a meeting with my boss and I was like, I may have done something really bad." Like, I wrote this article, I would refresh the screen and it would go 10,000 more people had read it. I hit the
Oh my
refresh button,
god.
10,000 more people. Psychology Today came out with an article about why my article was bad. And I
No.
remember, yes, and now it ended up I got a job at Psychology Today and it all worked out great, but in that moment, I thought of Psychology Today as being like the end all be all, and I was just like, "I think I really messed up." And so
Oh,
it
wow.
was more fear than anything that I had
Okay.
ruined my therapy career
Okay.
and that I wouldn't be well respected as a therapist or I'd never get a job or if people knew my story. So that's where it really, I think, made it hard to take the leap was I couldn't see myself, and I had done the research on, like, how much do authors make? $250 is, like, the average
Yeah.
amount of money authors make, so I was like,
Yeah.
"I won't quit my day job anytime soon," and
Okay.
then I
Yeah.
didn't know anything about, being a content creator and any of this other stuff because
Right.
again, the internet was too slow at that point to even
Yeah.
we didn't have TikTok 10 years ago and things like that.
Right. Right. And what I'm also hearing as you're talking is, it doesn't sound like you tied your worth to the success of this book. It was more tied to the work you had put in to be a therapist. And I think that's an important reminder for me that, whatever my account does or doesn't do, my podcast downloads do or don't do, it's like, and this is, if my therapist listens to this, she's going to be like, yeah, hello, we talk about this every session. It's my constant struggle with tying my worth to an external achievement. And it seems to me that I'm sure you have other, we all have stuff we can work on, but in that capacity, your worth was not tied to the success of that book.
Well, I hired a speaking coach at some point because I was like, "I don't know how to get on a big stage and speak."
Mm,
And one of the first things he said to me is, "Do you do you really believe that you deserve this?"
mm,
And I was like, "What?" And he said, "I think you're gonna go through your life and say, I wrote a viral article and I got lucky." And he
interesting.
said, "A lot of people could have written a viral article and they wouldn't turn it into a business."
100%.
And I'm not the kind of person that usually like randomly bursts into tears, especially in front of people I don't know, but I started to cry.
Yeah.
And he was like, "See," he said, "I want you to know you didn't just get lucky." He said, "With one viral piece of content that, you published on the right day at the right time." He said, "You turned it into something and here you still are." He said, "And until you 100% believe that you deserve it," he said, "I don't think you'll be successful like on the big stages and things like that." And he was absolutely right because for a long time I would just be like, "Yeah, I got lucky because I wrote an article that went viral," but
Yeah.
it's been hard work ever since turning it into a full-time business for sure, and I realized that had I not put in the work and kept doing all of these other things, it wouldn't have worked out, but it took me a long time to get there and say, perhaps I do have something other than just luck on my side.
Yeah. I think as people, we tend to struggle with that, right? Like seeing our value and seeing our worth and the work that we put in for ourselves. But I also think that there is still a lot of misconception in media, in the public, about what it is to be a personal brand and to have a career like this. I think that there is still a lot of this idea of like, oh, and I'm using air quotes, it must be nice. How lucky that you get to make videos that go on social media all day. That must be easy. That must be nice. And wow, you just sat down and you spend hours at a lake house writing a book. Must be nice, quote unquote. And until you've had the experience of doing it and putting yourself out there, I think it's I have perspective on that point of view because I do think it's really hard to grasp until you're doing it, but it's not easy. It's not a cakewalk. It's not all sunshine and roses, and you really are putting yourself and your story out there for public consumption to and there's a possibility that people are gonna pick it apart, rip it apart. Your, beloved Psychology Today was like, "No, no, don't listen to this girl." Like, there's a lot that goes into this. It is not easy to do.
It is not for so many of the reasons that you just mentioned. Like it's hard work, and then of course, you don't have a 9 to 5. You don't get to shut it
Yeah,
off.
exactly.
And when people look at it, they think a 3-minute video took you 3 minutes to film. Well, obviously,
No.
so many people spend hours, and they have teams of people helping them, and so many things go into it. And then, yeah, then somebody's like criticizes how you look,
Yeah. Yeah.
or it's something like that, and then you're like, oh. And then people don't get it either. You're on a vacation and you're taking photos for your Instagram and people are like criticizing you for doing that. There's so many weird things that come into be with creating content and all that goes into it and behind it.
Yeah. Is there anything that you've established, public facing that you won't talk about in your life? And were those things just from upfront, you said, "I'm not doing this," or was there a learning curve there? Was there a trial and error?
Um, I guess a couple things I do try to keep private. So my first husband like loved the spotlight, so I don't mind putting his photo out there because I'm like, I'm sure he's laughing right now wherever he is. They like his his
Okay.
book is his name's in my book. I purposely mention his name. He used to like have his name on his own license plate when he was a teenager, and he'd like
Oh.
run it into snowbanks so that it would say Lincoln on the snowbank. So like he wanted
Oh
people to
my
know his
gosh.
name. So I put that in the book on purpose. My current husband again comes from like the CIA background. He usually does not appear in like photos on camera. And then I just wrote a couples book. So then of course people are like, how come you never talk about your relationship?
Uh-huh.
It's something that we wanted to keep private.
Okay.
I honor that. I try not to give too much, in terms of safety reasons about my exact location at the exact moment, because
Yeah, of
sometimes
course.
there are people um, that you don't want to have all that information. So there are those certain things. I don't give a. I live on a boat now, so people find that intriguing, but I don't don't give out
You're
my
not
boat's
giving the
exact
coordinates.
GPS
Right.
coordinates of where I am at any
Right.
given moment.
Right.
Things like that, I guess, I don't really talk about, like, even though I have a podcast, sometimes I'm like, "Oh, I have an amazing story about this, but it's about my cousin, so I'm not gonna share it because it's not really my story to
Okay.
tell." So, I try to respect other people's privacy, or even if I'm talking about, like, former patients or current patients, like, it's de-identified enough that even if their mother were listening, they wouldn't know who I was talking about.
Okay. Okay. And so a conversation that's come up over the last few episodes is this idea of being like super niche in our content and who we're talking to, and sometimes creators struggling with that because there is so much overlap with the content and our real lives that there is fear around talking about other things or bringing in different aspects of their lives into a platform that is based off of one niche. Are there things in your life that you wish you could talk about more or would want to or plan to outside of mental strength?
I guess, well, again, the fitness part wasn't anything I planned on doing, and
Okay.
now that I did, like, it's been kinda cool, and people, I think, thought that was interesting. Um, I guess it's just, like, a lot of stories, again, when I can relate to people, I'm like, "Oh, I wish I could tell that story too," but I
Okay.
don't wanna reveal things about my family
Okay.
who may not want it revealed. That's probably the biggest one, is just
Okay. But you
personal
don't
stories
feel
that involve
like
other people.
okay, so you don't feel like in the platform that you've created, you don't feel limited in what you share there. It's like, I'm happy to share in this lane and I'm good with it. You don't feel like it sounds like you're just like, this is the lane. Like, I don't feel like I need to like cross lanes.
I guess because, like, mental strength can be applied to just about anything, and, like, I live on
Yeah,
a boat, so that has nothing to do with,
true. Okay.
but I'll show people, like, "Hey, look, it's a tropical storm, and Amy can't tie knots, but here we go, I'm gonna try anyway," or, like, we had an octopus come in the boat once, and, just, like, strange
Yeah.
stories like
Yeah.
that that I'm happy to share, and sometimes people follow me just because of that versus sometimes people follow me because I talk about running, or so I talk about some other things, but then, hobbies I have, or you can always relate it back to, like, I like to jet ski. Well, that's self-care, so I can always kind of relate it back to mental strength anyway.
Okay. Okay. And so I want to ask you, just in your experience again, like being, in the public eye with these platforms, I have your initial list of 13 in front of me if you need a refresher. But of those 13, are there any that you feel like you're consistently kind of drawing upon or going back to when you are public facing?
Yeah, I would say one, to not give up after the first failure.
Mm,
Again, I still post content that gets about 12 views sometimes, and like that's okay. It's only 12
yeah.
people saw it, so go back and try something else. And
Hmm.
just because people don't read it, I guess also doesn't mean it's a failure. Maybe you reach one person and it resonates with them, but trial and error I think is so important when it comes to this, and to keep trying. And if something you view as a failure happens, learn from it, move on and try again or try something else.
Hmm.
Another one would be to not give away your power, because so often we're like, that person said I was stupid or ugly, or they hated everything I just said. Doesn't mean it's bad. That's just their opinion. And then to be able to move forward and not blame other people, or it's easy, I think, to blame certain things like the Instagram algorithm, or it's easy to blame a company for not helping you enough when they promised they would. But to take back your power is about recognizing, okay, if that didn't work or this person isn't doing what I expected, then I'll take back my power and do it again, or I won't allow this person's opinion to affect further stuff that I do.
Hmm. Hmm. The one that hit me was resent other people's successes. And that one hit me with this world because I think comparison is such an easy trap to fall in when we're constantly scrolling. There's oversaturated markets and industries of people popping up left and right on online. And anything you want to add or say about that one in relation to this space?
That's a great one too, and I've been there as well. There's plenty of self-appointed self-help gurus who don't have any education or
Hmm.
expertise, and sometimes their advice is really bad.
Yeah.
And they're really popular on social media. And I have those moments of like, why? Why is their stuff, why are they attracting such huge audiences of people? They're giving out mental health advice that perhaps isn't the best. And yet I could share very similar content and mine won't resonate as much. So
Right.
yeah, I think to go back to that and just remind yourself that just because somebody looks popular or they're doing well or they do have good fortune, like doesn't mean it's taking it away from you. That means perhaps good news that there's an audience. People are super interested in this. And to remind yourself of that is really important.
Yeah. If if you actually had the number of people following along your journey on your platform sitting in front of you, like what is one thing that you would wanna say to them and that maybe about you? Like, what is something you wish the people that have been following you along and cheering you on really knew about you?
I guess that I'm not perfect. Every once in a while, somebody will say, like, I listen to your podcast, but I'm nothing like you because I have a lot of struggles. No, I do too. And I probably don't talk about those things enough that, yeah, well, I still struggle with it. That's why I wrote the list. And just because I wrote the list doesn't mean perfected it. Even after all of these years, I still struggle with some of the same ridiculous things that I did as a kid. And I think all of us have insecurities and self doubt and struggles that we all carry, me included. It's just about how do you deal with them better.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that because I think it's hard, especially if you are in the middle of a tough time and you're looking to someone who's written articles and books and has a platform and a podcast, and it's so easy, again, it's comparison really, but it's so easy to think, wow, like I want to get to that point. And I do think there are hurdles in personal growth and healing, but and it pains me to say it, but there's no finish line. Like,
Right,
we're all
right.
always growing and evolving, and even though you might not be in the same place that you were in when you initially wrote that first article, that doesn't mean your healing and your growth is just it's done. You've reached it.
Right. And
There's
there's
no
always
reaching
a
it.
bump in the road. You go around the next corner, like, yeah, it's easy to not feel sorry for myself when life is amazing. And then all of a sudden you go around the corner and something really difficult happens. And then that becomes much more difficult to not do, or so many things in life like that that challenge you in different ways. Or you meet somebody new and they bring out perhaps the worst in you. And you're like, why did that happen? So I think we can always keep learning about ourselves and our responses to whatever life throws our way.
Yeah. In being such a I can imagine like a rock for your community and just this source of this resource and just inspiration, who are you turning to for those things? Who helps keep you grounded? Do you have practices in place? Do you have support? Like, who's helping Amy?
Yeah, so I still, some of my best friends are the ones I met in kindergarten, literally. So I still have really good friends that aren't in this world, and that is super helpful, I think, to have people
Yeah.
who are just not in the content creation space. They could care less. They don't, follow me on
Right.
Instagram, nothing. So I think that is actually one of the most important things. And then I do have other friends that are in the business world who absolutely understand the struggles too. So it's good to be able to talk business with them, and they understand the changes in content creation and all of the hurdles that we face. So it's wonderful to be able to have those people to talk about it with as well. And then, my family who's like, "Oh, you wrote another book. That's good." But like they aren't and they're happy for me. They cheer me on, but it's not like our topic of discussion over the Thanksgiving table either. So that's helpful as well.
Yeah. Yeah, like, you need both, though. Like,
Right,
you
right.
need both. You need the people that get it, and then you need the people who can be like, "Whatever, there's other things we can talk about.
Right, right. Like the
Let's
latest.
not get in the weeds on our insights on Instagram right now."
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Alright, and so when is your next book coming out?
So December 26th is my book launch date, which is an interesting date for a book to come out, but it's called 13 Things Mentally Strong Couples Don't Do.
Okay.
People can pre-order it now, and if you pre-order it, you get a month of free therapy at BetterHelp, absolutely free. You can accomplish a lot in a month. My website has the details. It's Amy Morin, LCSW.com, which stands for Licensed Clinical Social Worker. But if you pre-order it from anywhere, just go to my website and show us a picture of your receipt, and we'll give you therapy that you can start right now.
Very cool, and I will link that in the show notes. Amy, is there anything that you wish I would have asked you today to talk about that I didn't think to, or anything kind of lingering on your heart, mind, or soul that you want to make sure to get into this conversation before we wrap up?
Oh, you asked so many good questions, and I guess I would just end with um to try not to be inside our own heads so much where we
Mm.
doubt everything and you second guess whether the font on something looks good, or you worry that you're going to say the wrong thing. Like I've said a lot of really wrong things, but sometimes you just do one thing right. And I guess my story proves that sometimes you just have something that clicks, and might not be what you expect, or people might forgive your mistakes more than you think too. I guess my parting words will be my TEDx talk is called The Secret of Becoming Mentally Strong. I don't think that's grammatically correct. It was supposed to be called The Secret to Becoming Mentally Strong,
Okay.
but they put a typo on it, so it's The Secret of Becoming.
Okay.
And 23 million people have seen that. I've had two people that have said, "Why'd you say of?" One of them happens to be my podcast producer, one was another stranger. So 23 million people, two people noticed the mistake that was in the title. So if you make a mistake, people do not notice nearly as much as you expect.
Fair enough. No, that's so solid. Like, and then even as you were talking about, when I asked you about what opportunities you've said no to and this and that, it's like nobody knows what you've said no to. Only you know.
Right,
You
right,
know what I
exactly.
mean? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yep. So, okay. Well, Amy, thank you so much for your time. I'm looking forward to the next book, and I just appreciate you being here. So, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Okay, so obviously Amy's story is so inspiring. I knew about it before interviewing her, but hearing it out loud from her was pretty surreal. Thinking of her pumping out articles for content mills essentially for a few dollars is wild, especially when she said that her article, which has now been everywhere many, many times, only initially earned her $15. I'm sure that Amy went through what so many of us go through when we're in that building phase, questioning whether it's worth it, imagining that nobody would ever read or see her work, probably even dreading it at times, and maybe even a little bit wondering what it would be like to do this full time. And then, boom, that article blew up in the best way possible. It's so awesome. And I think it's something we all need to remember. I said it on the show and I'll say it again. All it takes is one thing that we say that people really connect with. One video, one podcast episode, one tweet, whatever it is, it can happen when you least expect it. I don't think we should all sit around waiting for a big break or imagining that we're just one step away from like celebrity status or anything, but maybe we can focus more on the idea that we never really know what people are looking for in our work until they find it. And I also want to emphasize the fact that even someone like Amy has insecurities and imposter syndrome. I love the story she shared about how she was told, you need to know you deserve this. You didn't just get lucky. And it's so true. She worked hard for the original article, and it wasn't like that was the first article she ever wrote, but she poured her heart and soul into it, and it came from a really genuine place. And after that, she continued working nonstop. And if she hadn't, that would have just been a blip on the radar screen that faded away and nobody would even remember right now. But Amy worked it. She said yes to opportunities and kept pushing forward. We tend to doubt ourselves or overlook the hard work we put in or what we want to accomplish. But it's important to give ourselves credit and acknowledge our work and our worth. And finally, I want to emphasize what Amy talked about in terms of healing and mental strength and knowing that there's no finish line. She continues to work on the things that she wrote in that original article because guess what? Struggles continue to happen. She's built her career on mental strength, but it's from a place of knowing that these are things that we're always working on. We're not checking off a box. It's a process with no finish line. And I know I need that reminder often because I can't stand that, but I know it's true. We have to keep working and healing, and we have to keep reminding ourselves that we are bringing value to people and that we're going to make mistakes, struggle, or feel really big, annoying emotions along the way. So thank you so much, Amy, for this conversation, for all the work that you put out into the world. We need more of it. And thank you for listening. I'll catch you next time. Bye. Thanks so much for listening. This podcast is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. To learn more about me, my world, all the things going on, head over to ChristieRocha.com. Bye.